a two-time winner of the Congressional Medal of Honor. And after he quit the Marine Corps, he was the commandant of the Marine Corps, a very high position. After he quit the Marine Corps in the 1930s, he sort of came out of the closet, and he wrote a book about being a Marine and what it meant. And he said, I pacified Nicaragua for the National City Bank. We invaded China to make it safe for this business house. We invaded all other countries in Central America, Latin America, Mexico, etc., in order to make the world safe for democracy. And it's always about making the world safe for democracy, because you can't have a foreign policy that's based on the truth in this country, because no one would support it. No one would support an aggressive foreign policy based on the stealing of resources and the domination of other people. That would be unacceptable, I suspect, to everyone in this room and to most people in the country. So you have to have a foreign policy based on myths, on fantasies, on inventions of history, on distortions. No one has written more eloquently about this than Howard Zinn, the great historian, with whom I had a very close personal as well as professional relationship. He died a couple of years ago, actually 2 years ago, in this past January. An amazing figure in American history, because he uncovered a lot of the hidden nuggets that have been stored away and literally kept from view. If you examine most textbooks about American history, about the media, and about politics, most of it is, again, inventions and an imagined past of this vast land with very few people that were then civilized by the Europeans who came to settle this land. And yes, here and there were some unfortunate incidents like slavery, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands, the massacre of the indigenous population. But all of this was reconciled in a very nice kind of a bouquet, as it were, of American greatness, American exceptionalism. And if you listen to the foreign policy wonks, all these boring, mostly white men who dominate the media, who tell us what we should be thinking about Iran and how afraid we should be about Pakistan and other countries, then you'll find that most of it is in fact invention, not based on any historical fact. And of course, our great free press have a lot to contribute in terms of fabricating this history and of manufacturing consent for U.S. policy. There are so many embedded assumptions and presuppositions that go into the media that it's pretty hard to miss. But a lot of people do, in fact, miss them, because these ideas are now so embedded that they are in the aquifer, and we're all drinking from that water and then, kind of repeating the same propaganda tropes. So the title of the talk this evening is War of the Words, not H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, but I would contend that the War of the Words leads directly to War of the Worlds, because of the propaganda system here in the United States is very, very sophisticated. It is systematic, it's well thought out, and it is dominating the media. Yes, there are people like me, there are people like Noam Chomsky, Michael Parenti, and others, but basically, overwhelmingly, the message is carefully crafted and carefully manufactured. I was just looking, and I take my cue from Chomsky, because whenever I ask him, well, what are you going to, just before he gives a lecture, what are you going to talk about? He said, I usually start off with the New York Times. There's always something in the New York Times. It is not by accident. It is the best newspaper in the United States, no question about it. Particularly if you go to page 17 and the bottom paragraph, you'll find some absolute essential information. But above the page, on the front page in particular, selection of photos, headlines, and the like, you'll find how the system in fact operates. If you've been reading the Times over the last 3 or 4 weeks, almost every day without exception, there has been a very hostile and threatening article about Iran. You know, often citing many of the same war hawks who were so wrong about Iraq and Afghanistan. They've come back to life. This is like, you know, Dracula. You can't just stab them once in the chest. You have to kill them multiple times before they die. So people like William Crystal, Richard Pearl, Kenneth Pollock, totally disgraced by their opinions about Iraq and the tremendous threat Iraq was presenting. Does anyone remember 2002 and 2003 when we were going around and saying, hey, wait a second, slow down here. There's no evidence of Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. There's a lot of evidence of U.S. allies and the U.S. itself having weapons of mass destruction, like Israel, like Pakistan, like India, and the United States itself. But that was removed from any kind of scrutiny or discussion, and the focus, a hysterical focus, was on Iraq. And now they're back. And what have they had to do? They've taken those old press releases, they've changed the Q in Iraq to an N, and they've just, you know, changed and moved a few pronouns around, and it's the same propaganda. Iran is, you know, threatening the United States. I follow Iranian news quite a bit. I have not encountered any instances where Iran has threatened anybody, in fact. Iran has not invaded a country in 250 years. You can hardly go 2.5 years in U.S. history without finding the United States invading the country. But we have to be afraid of Iran. Iran has said certain things about Israel which have been enormously distorted and misrepresented and misreported in the U.S. corporate media. And it's just repeated ad nauseum. And again, it enters the aquifer. The politicians recirculate it. The questions from media pundits like Anderson Cooper, you know, with his 360s on CNN, a very cool guy, right, with short white hair. He's asking the question to his corporate selected golden Rolodex experts, will an attack on Iran be effective? Now, listen to the embedded assumption there, that first of all, there will be an attack on Iran, but how good will it be? Will it work? And then there's the debate that follows is, well, if the B-52s are used and B-2s, and we really hit them with everything we got, then we have a good chance of taking out their facilities. Then the other, this is from one retired general, like someone named David Grange, who's on Iran, a very, a diverse, multicultural, multilingual nation of about 80 million people, did have a bright, shining moment and an experiment with democracy from 1950 to 1953. Remember, this is 60 years ago. This is long before, Tahrir Square and the rise of the Arab revolts of 2010 and 2011. But Iran had a majlis, it had a parliamentary democracy, and it voted for a liberal-type Democrat, I would call him, no radical. After all, he was educated at the Sorbonne. He spoke French. You know what that means. That's a bad thing, according to these wingos that are, dominating the radio talk shows. Anything that has to do with France is, of course, immediately suspect. They must be gay or effete or, just too concerned with the Cabernet Sauvignon and the Merlot and, qu'est-ce que c'est, hey, tout va bien. So, so France is like a piñata in the media. If you want to make fun of something, attach the adjective French before it and then you'll get some laughs. Oh yeah, we understand what that means. They are appeasers, they want to concede. So, Mohammad Mossadegh was this man, this Iranian Democrat, a great hero to the Iranian people. He was democratically elected in Iran long before, what happened in Egypt, as I said, or elsewhere. And he had a very funny idea. Again, he was French educated, so what do you expect? His funny idea was what? The oil that was in Iran should benefit the Iranian people. I mean, how nutty is that? I mean, does that sound like some crazy person? Benefit the Iranian people. Sir, don't you understand how the world works? The world works for the big oil companies. Anglo-Iranian oil, which controlled all the Iranian oil fields, repatriated 100% of its profits to England. Who is Anglo-Iranian oil today? Your favorite environmental green oil corporation, BP. The very same people. This is their legacy. These are their genes. Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, after the coup, it became British Petroleum. Then they wanted to drop the petroleum, and now it's BP. And you can't miss the ads on the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer or the Charlie Rose show of BP taking out ads with happy people in the Gulf saying, "We're back, we're great, the water's clean, come on down. You know, everything's much better, the seafood tastes great." You know, because they're responsible for one of the worst environmental disasters in history. This is called greenwashing, folks. You're all exposed to it. It's all part of the propaganda of making you believe that corporations really care about the environment. Starbucks, all of them, Apple, they're all selling you this line of how green they are, and it's all a lie. Now, so in 1953, what happens to Mossadegh? Under President Eisenhower, the CIA launches Operation Ajax, which results in what? A coup, a military coup in Iran. Mossadegh is imprisoned. He's kept under house arrest until he dies, virtually. And the Shah, who had fled the country in disgrace, who had been in Rome, a CIA plane was sent for him. He flies back to Tehran, and he sits on the peacock throne for the next 26 years of tyranny, repression, and human rights violations, leading directly to the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979. Actions have consequences. When the United States and Britain, don't forget Britain was involved also, destroyed democracy in Iran, they enabled the Islamic Revolution to take place 26 years later. The same scenario was repeated in the 1980s in Pakistan and Afghanistan, when the United States and Saudi Arabia, that great champion of human rights and liberty and freedom and women's rights, of course, they're in the forefront, they made possible, they bankrolled, made possible, let me speak in plain New York English, you know, they bankrolled the Mujahideen. They created them. They funded all of these madarsa, the religious Islamic seminaries, all over Pakistan, greatly undermining Pakistani civil society, creating jihadists whose only goal was to kill Russians. Okay, they killed the Russians. Now they have all this training in arms and weapons and explosives. How are they going to use all that training? Well, they're going to turn it on themselves, resulting in the Afghan Civil War, in which more Afghans were killed than probably during the Soviet occupation of the 1980s, and which led directly to the victory of the Taliban. Many of the Taliban are, in fact, if not the same fighters. I mean, we know people like Jalaluddin Haqqani and Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and others were mujahideen, were jihadis fighting the Soviets. Their children, their grandchildren are now fighting in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So actions have consequences. The CIA has a technical term for this. They call it blowback. It's the unintended consequences of U.S. foreign policy. So you could say, and people have said, that 9/11 was directly connected to seeds that were sown by U.S. foreign policy in South Asia in the 1980s in creating this jihadist mentality and network.